Okay, the TradeDevils pivot indicator. Now, the pivot points have, of course, been around forever. I mean, many people are very familiar with them. We've done a little modification to ours, so you see the way that we use them and how we find value here. So I've just got a 15-minute chart up here of the S&P. It's Monday the 27th, about 2:50 in the afternoon. So here I've got the traditional pivot arrangement set up here. Now we do add to that the central and the directional pivot. If you're not familiar with those, of course the pivot, that's most of you will be familiar with the pivot point. We've got yesterday's high, low, and close divided by 3. We had the central pivot, which is literally just splitting the prior day. So it's the high and the low divided by 2, so you're literally splitting it in half. That's your central pivot, and then we add the directional pivot as well, and all you're doing here is just you're doubling that range. So the distance from the central to the pivot, then put that up here, you've got your directional pivot. And the implication is if we are above these, traveling higher than potentially a trending day here. So as the market opened, we were already fairly hot and have moved away. So here's the directional pivot above that all day. So now here's R1. These are your traditional pivot points, right? So R1, R2, R3, and R4 are still, and R4 is as far as we go. So set that. So these are traditional pivots. Again, these wouldn't necessarily be something to trade by themselves, but as a confluence point. So if I were had a fib extension, or if you were working with an oscillator, you thought perhaps you were overbought, oversold. It's something to use in conjunction with some additional technicals. It could be geometry, it could be a set of median lines or a channel that you felt was topping. If you saw that coming in right around a pivot or R2 or an R3 or something along those lines, you might give you a heads up, because algorithms still use these, many traders still use these, so they are not irrelevant to the market. Now you do have some choices here. We're giving you a few options. One of the variations on traditional pivots, the ones that I use more frequently, me being a bit of a Fibonacci head, I like the Jackson zones. So we give you that choice. So if I go over to my indicators here and I go to my pivot points, well, here you got a few choices in the parameters. You have all of the choices to whether or not you want to see any of this. Do you want to do daily, and when do you want your session time to end? Now, of course, if you wanted just the day session, you could run this indicator over the RT8, the regular trading hours chart template, and the calculations will be done automatically for you. I tend to, because we essentially trade this 24-hour markets, I tend to work off of the 24-hour, but for variation, and I will check both of these throughout the course of the day. One thought is that if you had an RTH open, you might keep that on traditional pivots. If you had a 24-hour going, I prefer the Jackson zones. So let me show you that. So Jackson zones, we maintain our directional pivot, it's our main pivot and our central, so we still have our pivot block here. But we get the additional of the zones here, and these are tied to fib relationships. So let me show that to you. So if here's yesterday's low, and I'm just going up to yesterday's high. Well, this being Monday, this would be Friday's high and low, so you can kind of see the low and the high from the prior day. So to get to the Jackson zones, well, if we we base it off of distance from the pivot. So from the pivot here to my R3, that's 100% of the distance from yesterday's high, low, projected from the pivot. Now along the way, we run into R1 and R2, and the way to, I think this is visually the better way to see it. So if we work from the pivot as it's coming up, it's got to get through the 50, and then R2 is the 618. And the implication is if we get beyond those, then potentially we have a trending day, and next targets would be R3. R4 now is the 1382. So let's see if I show it to you this way. So if we take this length here, and then I'm going to come all the way back to 0 here. So you see, here's the 1382. So here's 100%. Here's the 1382. So again, it's a big zone because we had a wide-ranging day. So you get a fat target up here. So you'd want to be more conscious of when we're hitting those specific levels. Just kind of a heads up. Again, with a zone that wide, you wouldn't necessarily be trading something in the middle, but you're in a range here where you know you potentially got some resistance up here. Same thing below, right? So just the mirror image coming down. So 100% from the pivot gets you to S3, and then again same thing if you were Yeah, so here, if we were coming down, so here's 50, here's 618, here's 100, then this would be 1382. So I tend to keep these on all the time on my 15-minute. Well, so my 15-minute, if you wanted to, here's what my 15-minute chart looks like. So I keep on my 15-minute, I will have, right here, I'll have all my pivots, and I may go back and forth between traditional and Jackson zone depending on what's going on throughout the course of the day. Here I've got traditional, so I want to have a volume profile. So absolutely, I want a volume profile, and I want to look back historically because I'm looking for structure, areas where I can identify potentially where the of course, volume profile being volume by price. So if I were to come back to a level, one of these prior levels, I'd want to be aware of that. Then additionally, we have our unfilled gap indicator here, so I want to know that there's an unfilled gap here, that the market does not like to leave those. I've got our news indicator up here, and I've got it filtered to show me just news events related to the dollar. And then I have our session high and low here, and our initial. Well, of course, I've got the initial balance, first hour of trading, so I can track. So note here, as we're just approaching here in the afternoon. Now we're through R1, perhaps another target here is R2. We're just coming up onto the 100% IB extension here. So 100%, the distance of the IB. As we approach that, I want to be aware of that. So I might do it this way. So if I was looking at that on my pivots, I'd want to pay attention to the Jackson zone. So if I now put that on, here's my Jackson zone up here. So if I'm going to stall before getting to R3, the 100% of the IB extension is a reasonable thinking. And you can just see, looking back, I mean, here's our S1, S2 going up to R1, R2. These tend to be, and market responds to them. Again, so much in the S&P, it's all about algorithms and the levels that they work from. So I want to be aware when we hit these kind of levels. Today's just been, since the open, we've just been slowly grinding higher, right? So this target here, the 100% of the extension, this 100% extension of the IB seems a reasonable target as we sit here approaching 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So there you go. This is at its base form here, and then applied to, well, at least you see what my 15-minute chart looks like. That's how I run them throughout the course of the day. All right, guys, there you go. Coming up. Perhaps a new high for the day. All right, there you go. I think that's everything we have to cover. Okay.